Right, folks, I've got a story for you here that I'm going to read to you in a moment that tells you all you really need to know about what's been going on our streets for the last 25 or 30 years. All that's still going on now, and it just really highlights the reasons that young kiddies, young girls and the families are going through such pain and trauma. I'll read it in a moment, but it comes on the back of something I seen yesterday on the TV. You may have seen the gent with his daughter on, I think, GMB yesterday morning on the sofa there. His daughter had been abused, raped, gang raped by these Muslim gangs, I think about 15 years ago now. Was it 20 years ago? It might be 20 years ago, to be honest with you. That really is irrelevant for all it happened. Wait a minute. I think it was 20 years ago. I think it was 2001 to 2005. Anyway, they're saying it started when I think she was 12. I think it was 12. And she kept staying away from home, and as the years went on, she was staying away from 3 and 4 days on the bounce. She would never tell her parents where she'd been or what she was doing. They knew she was up to some kind of no good, but they didn't know what it was. They assumed she got in with a bad crowd. They thought it might be drug related, but again didn't know. They'd ask her and ask her and ask her. She'd clam up all the time. They say she came from a good home, not a broken home, and it very much seemed that way with some of the pictures you saw. They said the husband, the father and the wife tried really hard over the years to find out what was going on with the girl, because they just didn't know. There was a time that they wanted her committed to a mental home just so as they knew where she was all the time, and she couldn't keep escaping from the home because she was going to school or wherever. She was just staying out. She said she was groomed from a young age by 2 or 3 people in the main, and after those 2 or 3 people began to have their way with her, she was passed around to many, many other people. And I think it was Susanna and old Richard was saying, Richard said to old Maidley there, to the dad, well, how come you didn't know? He said, we just didn't know. We didn't know what it was. But I'm guessing at that time, they didn't even know about grooming gangs because no light was shone on it. It was only probably really happening in the very early 2000s. As we now know, many councils, many police officers, many social workers were turning their back on the young girls. They were failing to believe it was happening. If and when it was, they were thinking, well, the girls are from underprivileged backgrounds. Not that makes it any good. And also, because it was by Pakistani Muslim men, they didn't. What the directive was, it's racist and don't call them and don't shine a light on them. So they didn't. In most instances, they never really interviewed folk or opened cases. It was just left in abeyance. Now, in the end, this girl said she went to the police on a number of occasions and a case was opened, but really nothing came of it. She's one of the girls that's now saying she wants a national inquiry, not the regional stuff. She wants a full national inquiry, and she wants her case to be re-looked at. And I sort of get where she was coming from, but I felt really sorry for the father. He's almost breaking down on the sofa there at GMB, and he's saying that we just feel like we let our daughter down. We couldn't help her, but we just didn't know. We genuinely, people might find it hard to believe, but we just didn't know what it was. We just did not know, and we didn't know what to do. He said we was at our wits' end. So I'll read you this story that I've seen on the back of that. That was yesterday morning, and then last night I'm reading this late on after I recorded, and I couldn't believe it. And I'll read it as I say. Oh, by the way, the young girl on the sofa, they said, well, why didn't you tell your mum and dad? She said, I couldn't. So what do you mean you couldn't? She said, well, at first you don't know how wrong it is and how wrong you're doing, but then you realise it's really, really wrong as you get older. The shame is there with you all the time. She said, but the real reason was fear. They said, what do you mean fear? What had happened to you? She said, well, what had happened to me? She said, yes. But more than that, what had happened to my mum and my dad and my family? They said, what do you mean? They said, because these gangs said, you can't say anything. You can't say anything. You tell your family, and they're next. We know where they live. We know all the names. We know everything about them. And she really thought, she said, that harm would come to her mum and dad. And I think she had another couple of siblings. And she said, I just thought, well, if I say what's what, and these men come round to the house, anything can happen to my family. They could even get killed. Anything could happen. On the back of that, let me read you this story that I read last night, as I say. Now, it's on another laptop, so you're going to have the side of me to do apologise. And it's very low on battery, and I've not got it plugged in. Right. This gives you an idea of when it went on and how things are still happening now. Because this, I think, is in court now. This is in court now, but you'll get dates of when it started. The headline was, It was in the press yesterday, but it was only in one newspaper, I think, and if you've not read it, you don't know the story. Rochdale grooming gang victims were raped by market trader known as the Knicker Man, and one was passed around by taxi drivers for months. That's the headline. The story goes thus. 2 teenage girls were groomed to become sex slaves for Asian men, including a market trader known as the Knicker Man, a jury heard today. Mohammed Zahid, who sold lingerie on the market and was said to have given free underwear to the teenagers, allegedly raped and sexually abused both girls after meeting the victims when he was in his 40s. Let me just scroll it down. A court heard Zahid gave the girls, who did not know each other at the time, free cash, alcohol, food and underwear in return for regular sex with himself and other Asian men in Rochdale, Greater Manchester. Zahid is alleged to have raped one of the victims in a grim, cold, dark basement, while the other was passed around for sex between taxi drivers in the town. The defendant, now 64, this was in his 40s, so it's 20 odd years ago, and is only at trial now, and who also went by the name Bossman, is on trial with 7 co-defendants, but was said to be the only one who had abused both alleged victims on the 56-count indictment. Prosecutor Rossano Scaramandella, KC, said both girls were well known to social services and other agencies, like I said earlier, and it was no secret that they were having sex with older Asian men. But he said no reports were made to the police and nothing was done at the time of the historic offending. Mr. Scaramandella added, no action was taken to stop what was happening to these 2 girls or to stop other similarly, I've said that wrong, I think, vulnerable girls suffering the same fate. The court heard it was not until 2010, 9 years after the abuse being outlined to the court allegedly started, that the investigators into child sexual exploitation in the town started. So it'd been running from 2001, 2010 till anybody looked into anything. Jurors were told that one of the 2 victims was identified as a potential victim at the time, but they declined to get involved. These various pictures of the people they go into court. Mr. Mohammed Zahid, another guy called, same guy that's the Knicker Man, wait a minute, and another guy called Rohiz Khan. I think we'll get to him in a moment. It was 5 years before she came forward to report what had happened to her, with the second victim also speaking to police and I'm sorry about this. It was 5 years before she came forward to report what happened to her, and she came with the second victim who also spoke to the police. Thus an investigation began. The court heard the girls were described as easy prey for the defendants. The men capitalised on their vulnerabilities for their own perverted sexual gratification in the most humiliating and degrading way imaginable, Mr. Scaramandella said. The court heard that the abuse began when each girl was just 13 years of age, and they were both abused for more than 3 years. They were expected to have sex with the defendants whenever and wherever the men wanted, jurors were told. Both girls were said to be vulnerable, with troubled home lives. They were known to the authorities, and one was in care. But they became beholden to their abusers, who, Mr. Scaramandella said, for the first time in their lives, treated them properly and gave them attention, and gave them the attention that they so desperately needed. That was before they had the way with them and did all that they did with them. He added, through no fault of their own, their troubled backgrounds made them susceptible to the advances of these men and others who behaved just like them. Their treatment at the hand of these predators was appalling. They were children passed around for sex. They were abused, degraded, and then discarded. And it was... and that it was the 2 of them that were exploited in this way. It was not by chance or choice. The prosecutor went on, it would begin by making the girls feel like grown-ups, as they were given alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, places to stay, and people to be with. Sorry, still scrolling down here, I do apologise. Over time, it is perhaps easy to see how they became beholden to men who for the first time in their life treated them properly. They've just done that one, so I do apologise. They've reprinted it, I didn't realise that. No, wait a minute. Over time, it was easy to see how they would become beholden to men who for the first time in their lives treated them properly and gave them the attention that they so desperately craved. But that would quickly change, and drastically so. The girls were expected to have sex with these men and others whenever and wherever the men wanted. They were often forced to have oral sex and vaginal sex with multiple men on the same day, in filthy flats and on rancid mattresses. Both girls would be expected to answer calls at all times of the day and night from the men that wanted to have sex with them. The court heard that the girls were expected to have unprotected sex with multiple men on the same day, in flats, cars, car parks, alleyways and disused warehouses. The girls were lied to about it being forbidden for Muslim men to use protection. So the Muslim men said they're not allowed to use protection. Mr. Scaramandella told Manchester Minchell Crown Court. These men cared not a bit about sexually transmitted diseases or unwanted pregnancies. The court heard that one of the victims fell pregnant at the age of 14 by one of the defendants, Kazir Bashir, who was 8 years older than her at the time, so he'd be 22. Some of the abuse was videoed, with the victim threatened that the film would be distributed if she did not have sex with her abusers, only for the footage to end up being disseminated to friends and family anyway. Yeah, that was right. The court heard the girls would hang around groups of Asian men at various parks, woods, or at Rochdale Market and Snooker Hall. They would be driven around by these men, picked up and dropped off at various flats and houses, the prosecutor said. They were forced to have sex on rancid mattresses and in filthy flats, he said. The court heard one of the victims was abused by Zahid and Hamed in the grim, cold, dark basement of a shop that belonged to the latter man. The court heard the basement had a mattress, which the alleged victim described as having an awful smell. She would have to go into the basement and take off her clothes and wait on the mattress, Mr. Scaramandella said. Jurors were told one of the men would go down the stairs to the basement for sex, leaving the girl naked on the mattress until the second man came down to treat her in precisely the same way. He said they displayed utter contempt towards the girl, who was allegedly abused by the pair, and Bashir at other addresses in Chadderton. That's near Oldham for those of you that don't know it. Mr. Scaramandella said at the address there would be many men there, all speaking their native language, which of course she did not understand, and she would be given Archer's peach spirit to drink. The girl said she had sex with as many as 5 men in one evening. Zahid had sex with the other girl in his car after taking her to a warehouse to choose free underwear, the court heard. He began introducing the girl to his friends, jurors were told. The court heard that she regularly used taxis which brought her into contact with drivers, including Mohammed Shadzad. The court heard she thought she had developed a friendship, but he went on to ask for sex after parking her in a car park and plying her with vodka and cola. She was then passed around for sex for months among taxi drivers who knew Shahzad, the court heard. Mr. Scaramandella said the gang of taxi drivers who used this victim for sex also included Arfan Khan. The court heard that when the police investigation began, the 2 alleged victims gave officers the names of the men that abused them. Once the investigation began in 2015, the alleged victims were taken on drives around Rochdale to identify places of significance. The court heard that when the police investigation began, the 2 alleged victims gave officers the names of the men who abused them. Once the investigation began in 2015, the alleged victims were taken on drives around Rochdale to identify places of significance, enabling the police to piece together where the sordid events took place. Both girls would be expected to answer calls at all times of the day and night from the men who wanted to have sex with them. One victim told police she would often be on the phone to one man while others were waiting on hold. The court heard most of the defendants were either connected to the market in Rochdale or worked as taxi drivers. Jurors were told that Zahid allegedly raped one of the girls in the back of his car while she was wearing her school uniform. Mr. Scaramandella said Zahid introduced Bashir, a fellow market trader, to the girl, whom he went on to make pregnant. Mushtaq Ahmed was a friend of Zahid and Bashir and ran a shop and a market stall, the court heard. Mr. Scaramandella said Zahid was at the centre of what happened to each victim. The alleged abuse took place between February 2001 and April 2006. Mr. Scaramandella told the court that there was a pattern in this case that is common to almost every example of child sexual exploitation. He said the crimes committed by grooming gangs span the entire spectrum of sexual offending, often beginning with non-penetrative touching over or under clothing, which then progresses to forced oral sex, and finally full penetrative sexual intercourse, rape in other words. The unique feature of child sexual exploitation is that the children are coerced, controlled, groomed and manipulated into sexual activity. He said offenders in these cases were cunning and would appear affectionate and kind, so that he said offenders in these cases were cunning and would appear affectionate and kind to those that they intended to exploit. At the heart of this very deliberate manipulation tactic is an imbalance of power, the prosecutor added. History demonstrates that the exploited children are often already vulnerable, with childhoods characterised by neglect, substance misuse and domestic violence. The prosecutor said co-defendant Rohiz Khan was known as Raja and Cockeyed Taz, although jurors were told that he didn't accept having the second nickname. Jurors were told he had previously faced a court accused of sexually abusing a girl and was convicted in 2013. Another defendant, taxi driver Mohammed Shahzad, was said to have the nickname Zero, which he denies. Arfan Khan, known as Afi or Big Afi, although he denies ever having the latter nickname. They've all got one nickname but not another, they say. The court heard Khan was a taxi driver and radio operator. Mohammed Zahid of Crumpstall, Manchester, is charged with 10 counts of rape, 4 counts of indecency with a child, 6 counts of procuring a child for sex. Mushtaq Ahmed, 66, of Oldham, is charged with 4 rapes, 4 counts of indecency with a child and procuring a girl for unlawful sex. Kazir Bashir, 50, of Oldham, is charged with 2 rapes and 2 counts of indecency with a child. Wait a minute, my computer's trying to log me off. Bear with me a sec, I'm nearly done and it's going off. Nisar Hussain, 40, of Rochdale, is charged with 4 rapes, indecent assault, assault by penetration, conspiracy to indecency with a child, and conspiracy to cause a child to engage in sexual activity. Arfan Khan, 40, of Rochdale, is charged with 2 rapes, conspiracy to indecency with a child, and conspiracy to cause a child to engage in sexual activity. Rohiz Khan, 39, of Rochdale, is charged with 1 rape. They all deny the charges. The trial continues. I'm going to flick down there. I think I've missed 2 people out there who were charged with all the same kind of things. That is being tried now. It happened in 2001 to 2005 or 6, did I say? It got reported in 2005, 2006 to the police. They turned a blind eye. Did they start investigating it between 2011 and 15, did I hear? And even though they started investigating it then, it's now only going to trial. Almost 25 years after the fact. Is it little wonder that you've got idiots like, what was his name? Is it Owen Jones or whatever else on one of the programmes of the morning saying, oh, in this country, he said, everyone's talking about Asian Muslims, Pakistanis. He said, it's all well and good that, but you look in this country, there's more white folk that are grooming young girls and having their way with them. More white folk than Pakistani. He said, yeah, all we focus on is Pakistani. And as I said at the time, that's because when they've caught the white folk, they've not been afraid to arrest them. They've not been afraid to say that they're white folk. They've not been afraid to try them. They've not been afraid to bang them up. As it was found that there were grooming gangs that were white, they've just got banded together, locked up straight away, and now they're doing time. With the Pakistanis, they've just turned a blind eye, a blind eye, a blind eye. That is when things have... And then they turned a blind eye to start with, when parents have reported, when kiddies have come in and reported. They've just brushed it under the carpet. They've done nothing. Done absolutely nothing. As I say, that happened 25 years ago. It's being tried now. The oldest men in the 40s are now in the 60s, and the youngest in the early 20s are in the 40s. Hopefully they'll all get banged up. None of them will get banged up for long enough. We'll tell them all that they're supposed to be deported when they come out. They'll fight it with legal aid like all the rest have, and they'll all still be back on the streets. The 40-year-olds will probably be 50, 55. They'll be bumping into the same girls that they raped 35 years previous, because that's like 10 years' time. It's all wrong, folks, and it's happening all the time. By the way, the couple yesterday weren't from Rochdale, the father and daughter. They were from Barrow-in-Furness, if memory serves. And as I say, she came from a lovely home, no abuse, no substance abuse, no nothing. No nothing at all. But she still got groomed. And that's the story I heard yesterday, and that's the story I read later. And I thought it's worth sharing. Right, I'll put the bins on, I'll knock it off. But that is what we're up against, and that's why we're doing these inquiries. But as people are now saying, maybe it should be a national one. But for me, it isn't a case of arresting people. It's more about arresting people and keeping them in for longer, and then ensuring that if they were born in another country, they return to that other country. We shouldn't let them get legal aid or any kind of aid. They shouldn't be appealing. That should be part of the deal. You go down, when you come out, you're out of the country. Can't do it again then, can they?